Hello everybody and welcome to this afternoon's PD session, which is all about Inclusion Focus Week. So last week at school we have been looking at inclusion with a different focus for each day, and in today's PD session our aim is to sort of tie it all together and make sure that we fully understand what inclusion is all about. Okay, so if you look at the definition at the top, I've written that inclusion basically means including all of the people that make up the whole of humanity, and especially those who historically have been marginalised. So that idea of pushed to the edges, if you think about where a margin is on a page, so marginalised from power or pushed to the edges. And one of the things in the last 30 years, I suppose, that has developed is different focus months. And you might have known that February last month was LGBTQ plus History Month. This current month, March, is Women's History Month, and 8th of March is International Women's Day. It has existed for over 100 years now, I think, International Women's Day. November was Disability Awareness History Month, and of course at school we commemorated Black History Month last October. So it's something that we're all starting to be much more aware of. And we at Seaford have chosen to focus on all aspects of inclusion this week, looking at all of these different formerly marginalised groups. So looking at women, looking at racial and religious minorities, those with mental health conditions, those with disabilities, and also those people who identify as being LGBTQ. Okay, so I think the first thing that's worth talking about is numbers here. Because sometimes people talk about minority groups, but actually if you put all of these people together, they, without a shadow of a doubt, the majority. If you add up the fact that 51% of the population of the UK is female. So often when I'm introduced this statistic when I'm teaching in the classroom, people often go, huh, how come? The basic answer is that women live longer on average than men do. And the reason, therefore, is that the population is slightly more female than it is male. I suspect that probably in your generation that will possibly change. And I think that's because the reasons why men historically die younger than women, which are to do with lifestyle choices, they're to do with factors such as war, to do with the fact that men are more likely to smoke, all of those things, also more likely to have risky jobs where they could die in the process of being at work. Those are starting to change. So probably in the 21st century, I think it's likely that it will become a little bit more balanced with 50-50, but at the moment it's 51% female. 16% of the population of the UK comes from a BAME background. Okay, so we're going to talk about BAME a few times today. BAME stands for Black and Minority Ethnicity. So that could be people who are Asian, it could be people who are Jewish, it could be people who are Asian, it could be people who are Black African, or it could be people who are Afro-Caribbean, any ethnicity that is not white British. Okay. 41% of the population either follow a religion other than Christianity or have no religion. In a typical year, a quarter of the population, so 25% of people in the UK, experience some form of mental health problem. Then 14.1 million people in the UK are registered as disabled. That is around 20% of the population, and it changes as people get older. In the older age groups, it is much higher than 20%. And 7% of the UK population identify as being either lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and plus. And I've just put a little note there that plus basically means all other sexual orientations that are not heterosexual. And you'll notice that I've put at the bottom that this is the data that's pretty much based on the 2011 census. Hopefully you've all had your eyes peeled and seen adverts on social media and on TV, and possibly something's come to the door now which tells you that March the 21st, 2011 is 2021 Census Day. And the purpose of the census, where you fill in information about who lives in the household, is given to the government so that they are able to know who the population is and ultimately provide services that match the population. So that's the main reason that the census is done. But as a historian, the census to me provides absolutely fascinating fascinating data to understand a bit more about who the people of the country are. Okay, there is a hyperlink there in the corner, which when we've watched the presentation together, your teachers can show you those short video clips. They're all about 2 or 3 minutes long. So this one is an introduction to feminism. It's about 3 minutes long. They're part of this really great series on BBC Ideas that you can all find on YouTube that tell you about all kinds of fairly complicated things that you might not really understand. So I would go and watch that video later on. Okay, so this slide really is all about how historically have all of these different groups that we've talked about been marginalised, pushed to the edges. And then secondly, how has the law in our country been changed to protect the rights of these groups? So being a historian, love a timeline. You can see here on this slide, we're starting off then with in 1834, the abolition of slavery in Britain and in Britain's colonies. So they're colonies in the Caribbean, colonies in Africa. So slavery was abolished at that point. Important to note, that's not the slave trade was abolished. The slave trade was abolished in 1807. So that's the idea of buying slaves, kidnapping slaves from West Africa and taking them over to the Americas. That was abolished in 1807. This is about slavery. The whole practice of slavery was abolished. Important step then to starting to see, for people to see a more general idea of equality between people. Moving then into the 20th century, you'll notice the vast majority of these events are all in the 20th century. We have the Equal Franchise Act of 1928, which all of the year 9s watching this will have learnt about in their history lessons. 1928 is the year Britain becomes a democracy. Up until that point, some women in Britain had won the vote in 1918 after the end of the First World War, but they were only women who were aged over 30 or who were married. So they were not equal rights for voting. However, by 1928, the law is passed, the Equal Franchise Act, that says all men and women can vote at the age of 21, and that is reduced to 18 in 1969. Then into the 1960s, there were lots and lots of important social legislation that takes place in the 1960s. In 1967, we have the Sexual Offences Act, which decriminalised homosexuality. And I know that there are a lot of people of your generation who have absolutely no idea that there ever were any laws that existed that said it was illegal to be gay, that you could be sent to prison for being gay. And it did happen a lot to people. So this groundbreaking piece of legislation in 1967 got rid of that. Moving into the 1970s then, we can see the Equal Pay Act and the Sex Discrimination Act is passed in 1975. So what that does is make it illegal to pay men and women differently for doing absolutely the same job. However, important caveat here for everybody, that does not mean that men and women earn the same amount, because as you probably know, there is still a really big gender disparity between how much men on average and women on average earn. Main reason for that? Babies. Main reason why women on average earn less than men is that women go on maternity leave and they take a career break, and they often choose to become a part-time worker, and therefore their average earnings are lower than men. And then the next piece of legislation you can see here is the Race Relations Act of 1976, which outlawed discrimination in all areas, so such as employment, such as education, such as renting a house, on the grounds of race. And then in the blue, we can see in 1995, we have the Disability Discrimination Act, made it illegal to discriminate on the grounds of disability. So that would be a mental disability or a physical disability in all of those areas, such as employment, education, and so on. And then this massively important law, the 2010 Equality Act, because essentially what that did is realise that all of these other laws that we've talked about before were all a little bit all over the place and a bit messy, and the best thing to do was to put them all in one place, and that's what that law does. It brings together every other piece of discrimination legislation and put it together in one law called the Equality Act. And one of the other videos that you're going to watch, again another 2 or 3 minute one, is explaining about the 2010 Equality Act. And the last one that you can't see very well because my picture's over it is the 2013 Equal Marriage Act. So that is the law which says that it is possible for same-sex couples to marry. Groundbreaking piece of legislation, was passed 8 years ago in 2013. Okay, so the hyperlink here for teachers who are using this later on, so that blue hyperlink there, the 2010 Equality Act, is the short video to watch. So one of the things that we are asked in UK schools to do is to promote what the government calls core British values. And these are two little images that I've stolen off the internet basically for different schools and how they use to promote these ideas. But if you think that one of the government's British values it talks about is tolerance in faith and beliefs, okay, so that absolutely is what inclusion is all about. But it is also then about individual liberty, the freedom of people to choose to live their lives in different ways. Then also the idea of mutually respecting everybody who has differences that they may wish, not that they may wish, but differences that should be respected. Then we can see these other two things, and this is where I, as a politics teacher, think this is vital. That the thing that holds up Britain and that makes Britain work and function as a democracy is this thing called the rule of law. And the rule of law is a very straightforward idea. It basically means that everybody, no matter who you are, has to obey the law. And that if you don't, there will be consequences. And so the 2010 Equality Act says that you cannot discriminate against somebody because they are transitioning. And it is illegal to do so. And that organisations must put in place things to ensure that that right is respected. And these are all part of the core British values that we have as citizens of the UK and of a democracy of which we are enormously privileged to live in this democracy. Okay, so if we think about this year's hashtag for International Women's Day, it's choose to challenge, okay? And so just thinking about this question that if all of these rights are now protected by laws, so I've just gone through that timeline of the Sexual Offences Act, the Equal Pay Act and so on, you might say, well, if those laws exist, what do we need to have a slogan then that says choose to challenge? Because we have protected those by laws. However, I'm sure most of you realise that just because a law exists, it doesn't mean it doesn't get broken. Okay, let's use the example of school. Just because a rule exists doesn't mean it doesn't get broken. What happens is if rules get broken, it's the authority, that's the wrong word rather, it's the responsibility of those in authority to make sure that if those laws are broken, that consequences happen so that people know that those rules matter. That's part of the rule of law. Okay, so people need to work really hard to make sure that if they see around them people not having their rights respected, that everybody has a responsibility to challenge. So you can see here I've just collected some images such as for autism awareness there is this jigsaw slogan just to remind people about how everyone's different and fits together. And then you can also see Stonewall. So Stonewall is the LGBT pressure group, and this woman is wearing the t-shirt saying some BAME people are LGBTQ, get over it. That's their slogan. Accept it. Just get used to the fact that people have different identities. The one on the right hand side, the patriarchy, so this idea of men having power over women isn't going to smash itself. It's one of those other hashtags which is smash the patriarchy. So clearly this is a t-shirt actually where this image is from, saying, you know, all of these different women, some of whom I think you might recognise. You can see, I think, Malala there, Wonder Woman, sorry, not Wonder Woman, not Superwoman. I can see Ruth Bader Ginsburg, so the American Supreme Court Justice there. All of these different women, you know, this patriarchy isn't going to smash itself. You have to keep working to make sure that we choose to challenge and protect these rights, which are protected by law, but can be trashed and walked over. And then the green one I think is brilliant, this green poster. The green poster is about disability awareness, and you can see it a bit more clearly on the next slide. But the list there of all these different people who have had a different kind of disability, and that those disabilities together are irrelevant, because what matters is that each of these people, because they had that disability, were able to make a difference. And the whole idea of inclusion is that by being together, by being different, we are more powerful and we are stronger, which is pretty much this idea that I wanted to talk about here. Why does being an inclusive community, so if we think about us ourselves at school at Seaford, why does being an inclusive community make us stronger and more successful? First point is that by being inclusive, it allows the unique skills that people have to be brought to that community and then shared and used for everybody's benefit. And definitely, I think the second bullet point is vital too, that people with different experiences can often, the phrase is, think outside the box more and spot problems and suggest solutions. So if you're looking there at some of the names on the slide in the green poster at the side, for example, people like Steve Jobs, people like Frida Kahlo, people like Keira Knightley, John Lennon, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Isaac Newton, General George Patton, all of these people had different kinds of disabilities, and yet those experiences probably made them better at thinking outside the box, which meant that any community that they worked in, that they probably brought unique skills which enabled that community to be stronger and more successful. And I always use the analogy of teams in this. So if you're thinking that that could be a quiz team, it could be a sport team, it could be a prefect team. When I'm teaching politics, I always talk about a cabinet. And that actually the most successful team in whatever context means that each different person who comes to that team brings a different talent, which then complements those of other members, okay? And enables, that means that as a group, each person brings something different and it makes the team stronger. So when I'm talking about a cabinet, for example, we look at how in the UK, it's always considered to be important that some of your cabinet members come from the different parts of the UK, such as Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. That some people come from the world of academia, so like a university background. Some come from the world of business, some come from the military, some come from the world of finance, for example, okay? It's always considered important that there is a fairly decent gender balance, that it's not dominated just by men, and it's not just dominated by women. Also then looking at all the other things that we've mentioned. So looking at sexuality, looking at background, social class background, all of those things, it is a better, more successful team at spotting problems and finding solutions to those problems by being inclusive. And one of the other things here that I've mentioned is that if you are marginalised, and I'm going to bet that pretty much everybody who is watching this presentation today is identifying with one of those characteristics that is mentioned by the Equality Act. So feeling marginalised in some way helps us to be more empathetic, to understand how other people feel. Okay, and successful and strong communities are based on that empathy, that we understand the feelings of other people and we work together to overcome any of the problems that might arise from those people's feelings. Okay, so by being a more empathetic community, we are a stronger and more successful community. And I obviously found my colours here and wanted to use lots of different colours to just kind of give this rainbow idea that the 21st century is not the world it used to be. In the 20th century, in the 19th century, and all the way back in history, pretty much the world was one that was dominated by straight men, by white men. It isn't anymore. You're not going to work in a world that's like that. We don't live in one now that is like that. And so it is our job to make sure that we understand about inclusive communities. Okay, and I'm sure quite a lot of you have seen this poem before. It's certainly on a tea towel in my classroom that's on the wall. And it was written by a Protestant pastor, a German Protestant pastor during the Second World War, whose name was Martin Niemöller. And it's all about how during the Third Reich, so during the time of the Nazi domination in the 1930s and 1940s, there were lots of warnings that tolerance was not part of how the regime was operating. And this is his poem, and I'll read it to you first and then you can watch it in a moment. And I just thought, as I was looking at this hashtag Choose to Challenge for International Women's Day 2021, I thought it's absolutely all about Niemöller's poem. So he wrote, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." And Niemöller was arrested by the Nazis for being a critic of the regime and sent to a concentration camp. And you can see on the bottom of the poster there where the poem is, the yellow Star of David that was worn by Jewish prisoners in a Nazi concentration camp and Nazi extermination camp, and the pink triangle that was worn by homosexuals in the Nazi concentration camps. And this idea that unless we choose to challenge and stand up for other people, there might be potentially nobody left to stand up and challenge for us then. And that last hyperlink there is a reading, very powerful reading, I thought, of that poem. So reminding us about why it is so amazing to be inclusive and why we are stronger and more successful and happier as a community if we include everybody. Okay, so now your teachers have all got a task for you to do, which is using some of the new vocabulary that you might be encountering as you're learning about different types of inclusion, and then also to look at identifying how confident you feel about using that new vocabulary by using the red, amber, green structure, so that you would rate any word that you're not confident at using at all as red. Any word that you are kind of confident, you might have a go at using as amber, and any word you're like, yeah, absolutely, happily use that word, totally understand it, it's not a tricky one for me at all, as green. Okay, so matching up the different meanings and then doing the red, amber, green task. So thank you ever so much, everybody, for your attention today, and it's been good to talk to you all. Thanks then, bye-bye.
We want to live in a more diverse world, and we choose to challenge discrimination towards the LGBTQ+ community.
We want to live in a diverse world, and we choose to challenge race and faith discrimination.
We want to live in a diverse world, and we choose to challenge gender discrimination.
We want to live in a diverse society, and so we choose to challenge disability discrimination.
We want to live in a diverse world, so we choose to challenge mental health discrimination.
Will you join us in support of this?
Will you join us in support of this?
Will you join us in support of this?
Will you join us in support of this and send in your photo?